The Harper Conservatives have announced plans to settle 10,000 Syrian refugees over the next 3 years and 3,000 more Iraqis by the end of 2015. Private sponsors play a key role in the refugee policy, and joining us now for more on that role, Alexandra Kotyk. She is sponsorship director at ORA, the Anglican United Refugee Alliance, and an elected member of the Sponsorship Agreement Holders Council. And Alexandra, it's good to meet you. Good to have you here at TVO.
Thank you.
Just remind everybody, what is it that our government has promised to do here?
So over the next 3 years, they have said that they will bring 10,000 Syrian refugees, and our understanding at this point is 60% of those they expect to be sponsored by private communities like the one I represent, and they plan to bring the other 40, and then they've also pledged to bring another 3,000 Iraqis on top of that.
Who decides who those refugees are?
Well, we hope that it's going to be the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which is the normal referral agency. However, if the 60% are being privately sponsored, then the way private sponsorship works is those people are identified by the civic community in Canada, usually friends and family members.
The United Nations High Commission for Refugees, which you just mentioned, has been pleading with us for some time to do something. Does this satisfy whatever the something was that they wanted us to do?
It's a start, and it's close to what they asked us to do. So in a pledging conference on Syria, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees had said, over 2 years, we would like all the countries in the world to make spaces available totaling 100,000 sponsorship for Syrian refugees.
100,000?
100,000. And Canada's idea is that we usually take about 10% of the requests, so that the number makes sense in that. 10,000 of 100,000. However, that was supposed to be over 2 years. So stretching it that third year is not quite exactly what was asked for.
Okay. How much consultation did the government have with groups such as yours before announcing this?
I know of no consultation with the Sponsorship Agreement Holder Association. They may have asked Quebec, but Quebec is a different immigration system than the rest of Canada, so we would not have known about that. But from our perspective, no consultation.
And presumably you thought you should have been.
Well, that would be the idea. If we're going to do more than 50% of this work, then obviously we need to discuss how it's going to work.
Well, that was my next question. How do you find 60% of 10,000 people and get them over here in an efficient, humane fashion?
Finding them is not as much the problem as going through all of the process. So, I mean, at my office today, I had calls directly from refugees in Lebanon and Jordan calling. Which is heartbreaking, obviously, because language barrier alone means that I have a hard time talking to them. And there is a large Syrian community, although I will say 50% of the Syrian community is in Quebec. So we're trying to work with not always the biggest community in Canada, and they tend to be in, Toronto and other major cities. So we have friends and family members that are contacting us saying, please help our family. But then there is a huge liability cost to sponsoring. Just one person is $12,600 of liability, and it goes up from there. So not everyone has that in a bank account somewhere. So to try and fundraise that, or to try and figure out a payment plan for that, for a family member or for a church, and then to go through all of the paperwork and documentation can be 6 months to a year.
And the way things are going over there, who knows if they'll still be alive by that point?
Well, that's the thing. I've had 2 or 3 cases that I've been desperately trying to work on, and I've lost contact with a few of the refugees. Some have thankfully been resettled to other countries that are doing different types of resettlement, which are faster, which is fine and preferable, but it breaks my heart to think of the ones that I can't contact anymore.
You pointed out private interests such as yours are going to do 60%, the government 40%. Do you both go about it the same way? Or is there a different way of getting people over here?
The same way, in that the refugees have to meet the same criteria. They have to be designated refugees under international and Canadian law. But as I said before, Canada should be getting most of its referrals from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and we would get ours in different circumstances, from friends and family member or direct calls. But then, yes, once they're overseas with the cases, they would process them about the same way.
Okay, and do other countries do it the way we do, where we have such a significant private interest involved in this?
Actually, Canada is the only country in the world that has private sponsorship. Yeah, Australia is looking into it, and I think has started some work on it, and colleagues of mine have talked to other countries. Certainly the EU is very interested as a whole of looking at this, because it is a program that means that the government is not paying. So the work is still being done, but private citizens are paying. But to date, we're the only country that does this.
Why is that?
I really think it has a lot to do with the history of our country. We're a very humanitarian country. The program started with the Vietnamese boat people at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. And Canadian citizens and certainly church people looked at what was happening and said, we need to help. It's not enough just to let what our government is doing. We really want to get involved, and we really feel a pull to these people. And I think a lot of people continue to feel that. And so that's sort of why the program exists and why it continues to be something that's viable and builds.
What was that? Was it the Nansen Medal that we won many years ago?
Yeah, we're the only country at this point that's won the Refugee Nansen Medal, which is an amazing accomplishment in '86 for the country of Canada to win that, to saying that we've done so much work on refugee help.
So we have been leaders for a long time on this kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Now you are with, if I can put it this way, a church group, for lack of a better way to put it. Can individuals also sponsor people and bring them over without being affiliated with any organization?
There is a program that's a group of 5, so you have to have 5 Canadian citizens. It tends to be family members, and they have pretty rigorous financial commitments that they have to make. So not an individual per se. However, I will say that a lot of the groups that we work with, the private sponsors, it tends to be a single family member asking to work with us, and there's a partnership there.
Alexandra, would you say that organizations such as yours, religious groups or refugee-oriented groups, are growing in the overall picture of who's responsible for bringing refugees over here and helping them settle?
Yeah, I think we are in the overall context of who is brought to Canada under a refugee program. And what's a little concerning is the program began as an additionality. So it was
meaning what?
Meaning that the government brings the refugees that they bring, and then the private groups and citizens, anyone extra that they're bringing is sort of, to be a little crass, gravy, right? So we're getting our citizens to decide how many extra people they want to help. And that used to be totally open. You could sponsor anyone in the world as long as they qualified as a refugee. And what we've seen is a trend of us doing a lot more sponsorship and being told a little bit more and limited on which types of refugees we're supposed to sponsor.
Do you think it affects the reputation Canada has around the world as a place that welcomes refugees when you're doing 60% of this ask and the federal government is doing 40% of the ask?
I think it's definitely going to affect us if we're not able to make those numbers. And that is a worry that our community has, because historically Canada's government has done the lion's share of this, and we've sort of worked with them afterwards and, like I said, done additionality on that. So to make a pledge of 10,000 Syrian refugees and then potentially not be able to actually meet that because the private sponsors are being able to ask to do so much is worrying.
They need you to make that work, don't they?
They do, and at this point we have no idea what the plan, if any, is if we start getting into second and third year and are not making those numbers.
Would that be true for overall refugee policy?
I think that we have been doing at the same level as the government. So I do think they depend on private sponsors to be able to say the large numbers of people that are being brought to this country. And
yet I presume their ability to tap into resources must dwarf yours. Isn't that the case? We assume so. Yeah, I mean, the churches and community groups, they manage to make it work financially, but it is, you know, a little bit here, a little bit there, $50 from this person, a few dollars from this person, whereas the government has much larger resources, obviously, and that is part of the reason why most governments in the world are the only one doing the sponsorship and bringing refugees. Alexandra, good luck with your efforts. You are the sponsorship director at the Anglican United Refugees Alliance. Thanks so much for coming into TVO tonight. Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.